Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're embarking on a journey exploring these ideas around spiritual guidance and inner purification. This is all drawn from that YouTube video, Reality of Life Itself, Iceberg Explained, by Sheikh Nurjanan of the Mohammedan Way Sufi Realities. We know you want understanding that's, quick but also quite deep. So our mission today is really to pull out the key insights from this talk. We'll be looking at how much importance the speaker gives to spiritual guides, he calls them, Audia and Balyun and Mashidun, and also this process he calls inner cleaning, and the role of practices like zikr, remembrance, and seeking madad or support, basically trying to get a solid handle on this unique spiritual perspective, maybe without getting too bogged down in all the specific terms right away.
Yeah, and what's really striking right off the bat is the speaker's focus on the value of being, like with Eloia. Now, Eloia usually translated as saints or maybe close friends of God. He talks about being with them not just as, a good thing, but as a real gift. Imat and Rama, he says a blessing and a mercy straight from Allah, AJ. And he suggests that if you distance yourself from these awliya, you're basically distancing yourself from God's blessings. It really sets up this idea that connection to certain people is crucial on this path.
Okay, let's unpack that a little. It sounds like he's not just talking about general piety, like being a good person in general. He's pointing specifically to these awliya as like vital links to getting divine favor. Then he brings another term, Waliyun Murshidun, and mentions Surah Al-Kahf from the Quran. So what's the relationship there between Aliyah and Waliyun Murshidun, according to him? Is one part of the other, or are they different roles?
That's a really key distinction he makes. The Waliyun Murshidun is presented as a specific type of wali.
Yeah.
An authorized spiritual guide. In the speaker's view, real guidance, true guidance on the spiritual path, it's channeled through them. Through these wali and murshidun, he actually says quite strongly that people who haven't been granted a wali and murshidun haven't really been given spiritual light. So that really emphasizes needing a divinely appointed guide,
Yeah.
And it stands in contrast to, say, the view that you can just study the fundamentals of Islam, the usul, and, make progress through your own efforts alone. It's definitely a central idea for this specific Sufi approach.
Right. And this is where it gets really interesting, I think. He then talks about true understanding, about certainty. He brings up different levels. Ilm ul yakin, which is maybe like intellectual knowledge, knowing with conviction. Then ayn ul yakin, the vision of certainty, and hakul yakin, the actual truth of certainty. It sounds like he's saying just knowing about something isn't the highest level.
Exactly. Ayn ul yakin, the way he describes it, is more like a direct witnessing of reality. A perception that's, in his words, dressed by Allah, AJ, from Al-Alim, the all-knowing. And this apparently gives the person the sifats, the attributes of knowledge and absolute certainty, which he calls haq. And he contrasts this with guidance that might just be based on, say, philosophy or even just hope, where, teachers might be teaching things they haven't personally experienced, haven't witnessed. And he suggests that kind of guidance could even lead to a loss of energy, maybe hope, because it's not grounded in that direct, undeniable seeing. It's like, reading a recipe versus actually tasting the dish. Big difference.
Okay, so that focus on direct witnessing, that then connects to the Naqshbandiya Sufi path he mentions. How does that fit in?
Well, he highlights that in the Naqshbandiya way, knowledge itself is seen as a miracle, like a divine gift. And the ijaza, which is the spiritual permission or license to guide others, he presents that as something really quite rare. It's apparently only given to those whose hearts have genuinely opened up, who've personally witnessed these spiritual realities he's talking about. So it's not just about being learned like a scholar. It's about this deep experiential knowing that comes through, direct connection and divine grace. And that ties right back to that Ayn ul yakin idea, needing that vision of certainty before you can truly guide others.
Got it. Now, the video title mentioned an iceberg, and that analogy comes up when he talks about inner purification, or what he calls cleaning. He says we only see the tip of the iceberg with the work these guides do, especially in the Malakut. That's usually understood as the heavenly realm, right? So what is this cleaning? What does it involve?
Right, the cleaning. It's described as this nightly purification process. Mm-hmm. It starts apparently when someone gets initiated into a tariqa, a specific spiritual path or order. And by doing certain practices, he calls them wazifas and awrads, specific recitations and devotions, the speaker says that spiritual beings, malaika kotirin, purified angels, are sent to cleanse the person. And the goal of this cleaning is to cut the roots of the nafs. Now, nafs is a tricky word, but here it seems to mean the ego or the lower self, the part that binds the soul to worldly things and, holds back spiritual progress. So think of it like a deep, ongoing spiritual housekeeping, maybe.
Okay, so a continuous spiritual refinement, and he links this cleaning to death and the experience in the grave, suggesting that people who haven't followed a tariqa might have a harder time. How does he connect those?
Yeah, he suggests that actively doing this inner purification through a tariqa actually prepares you for what comes after death. Practices like muhasaba, self-reflection, self-accounting, and khalwa, spiritual retreat, these are often part of a tariqa, and they're seen as ways to get familiar with the kind of inner examination the soul goes through after leaving the body. He implies basically that if the nafs, the ego, hasn't been worked on and purified during life, then separating from it at death and the questioning in the grave that follows, well, it could be much more difficult, maybe more painful.
Wow, okay, that sounds like a very active, very involved path.
Yeah.
So what about the specific practices? What role do they play in this cleaning and, general spiritual upliftment? He mentioned zikr and salawat being like fire.
Exactly, like fire. Practices like zikr, remembering God through repeating specific phrases, names. He describes that as a fire that literally burns away the negative stuff from the nafs. But it also, at the same time, draws down heavenly energies, blessings, and salawat, the prayers and praises on Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and he portrays that as an even more powerful fire, one that brings divine light and unlocks deeper understanding of Allah's AJ attributes, God's attributes. And he really emphasizes the role of Prophet Muhammad here, calling him Mr. Urama, the key to divine mercy. So yeah, these aren't just like rote recitations. They're seen as really potent, transformative tools.
He even connects dressing nicely for Friday prayer, Jummah, with being sort of spiritually adorned with zikr and these divine lights. And then he brings it muraqabah and seeking madad. What are those about?
Right. Muraqabah is a kind of spiritual connection or meditation, focusing inwardly, often towards the guide, the sheikh, or towards the divine presence itself. And madad, that's the act of asking for spiritual help, support, assistance from these guides. The belief here is that because of their spiritual level and connection, these sheikhs actually become present and can help or intercede when someone sincerely calls on them. The speaker also kind of touches on this idea of a spiritual transaction, like being purchased from shaitan, from negative forces. Through love for Prophet Muhammad and doing these practices consistently, it might even lead to a sort of divine liberation command, he implies. He also makes sure to link these paths back through lineage, mentioning the holy companions, the Sahabi of the Prophet specifically citing the Naqshbandiyatul Aliyah order and its connection back to Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq as a Mahiti, who was, incredibly close to the Prophet.
Okay. And this cleaning process, plus the practices, plus seeking madad, this is what allows the soul to be, pulled out by the sheikhs during muraqabah. He used that image of folk ships from the Quranic chapter Yasin for the guides. Can you explain that analogy a bit more?
Yeah, the ships analogy, it's pretty evocative, isn't it? These spiritual guides, because they've gone through their own intense purification and training, they're seen as these sturdy ships, basically, capable of navigating the spiritual oceans and carrying others safely. They're believed to have the ability, through divine permission and their connection, to uplift the souls of their followers during muraqabah, drawing them closer to the divine. So it's not just an individual climb, you see. The guidance and the active support of those further along the path are seen as really essential.
Right. And finally, he talked about tafakkur, which is contemplation. Specifically, doing it with the sheikhs and in the presence of Prophet Muhammad. He mentioned a hadith, a saying, about how much more reward there is for that kind of contemplation in the world of light compared to time here in the material world. And he referenced the Isra wal Miraj, the Prophet's night journey and ascension, as an example of transcending time. What's the main point there?
Yeah, the main message with tafakkur in this context is really about the huge transformative power of connecting with what he calls the world of light.
Yeah.
He's suggesting that focused contemplation, especially when done in the spiritual presence of these realized individuals, and the Prophet Ghee, it can bring about spiritual rewards and growth that just dwarfs the equivalent time spent in, ordinary worldly stuff. Referencing the Isra wal Miraj just highlights that idea that in those higher spiritual states, our normal understanding of time and space just doesn't apply in the same way. It really underscores the immense value they place on these moments of deep spiritual connection and contemplation, which are facilitated by the guides.
Okay, so pulling it all together. This deep dive into Sheikh Nurjan's perspective, it's shown us a spiritual framework that really, really emphasizes the role of spiritual guides. These awliya and waliyun murshidun, they're seen as essential for getting divine blessings and real guidance. We've looked at this idea of inner purification, the cleaning of the nafs through the practices of a tariqah, and the importance of things like zikr and salawat for drawing in divine energy and light. And finally, we touched on muraqabah, seeking madad, and tafakkur, for boosting spiritual growth and connecting with, well, higher realities. It's definitely a perspective that puts a high value on direct spiritual experience and guidance from those believed to have achieved major spiritual insight.
Exactly right. It provides a very distinct map, you could say, for personal and spiritual development. One where connection to a spiritual lineage and the power of specific practices done under an authorized teacher are absolutely central.
And that kind of leads us to our final thought for you, the listener. Think about the really profound implications here. These ideas about inner purification, the nature of reality. If our experience of time and effort could be so radically different in this world of light he talked about, what other basic assumptions that we hold might be challenged or expanded if one were to explore these kinds of spiritual paths more deeply? What part of this perspective really clicks with you? Or maybe what further questions does it raise about your own journey of understanding and growth? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.